pop up. Takes like a 45-second delay. And hey, Karen. Hey, Joshua. And Belardo. Pop up. All right. 45-second delay. Let's kill that so I don't have my audio feeding back in. And all right, looks like we are live over on YouTube.
Cool.
Kevin, everything okay on your end as far as you see?
Yeah, you're good to go, sir.
All right. Okay, folks, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be hosting these today, actually all day today. I'll be hosting. Dan is out sick, and we got a lot of stuff today. We also have a lot of stuff tomorrow. And if you guys have been watching these, paying attention, remember tomorrow is essentially our Crit Friday, and so if you want to have professional animators looking at your work, you need to get it up today, because we're going to review them all tonight and start assigning them to the slots. And so we do have a couple more slots left. Make sure you get your stuff in, because we're just going to prioritize people who uploaded their work first. Okay. And these aren't small meetings. These are going to be, 15, somebody might even get 30 minutes of time on their work. So this is a pretty substantial moment for us to kind of look through and help you become a better animator. All right, and that's really the goal of everything that we're doing here at Vertex right now with Animate 2021 and with the new animation program. All right, so all of that stuff aside, I would love to introduce you to Kyle Figgins. And we're gonna have a conversation here today with Kyle. We're gonna talk, I think, Kyle, about your wandering career path. Is that right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah. I thought other people will cover much more interesting topics about what they've done or projects they've been a part of. But
yeah,
since I've kind of gone through quite a few different fields and disciplines, I thought that might be kind of fun to share with students that might be starting out and not knowing exactly where they want to go or expecting that that'll be their first place they get to out of school. So
awesome.
Some of that a little bit. So.
All right. Yeah. Well, I was hustling through your Twitter and your LinkedIn today as I was trying to figure all this stuff out. So why don't we start at the beginning? At like, was there? Because I think I read that Blizzard, or was it Blizzard, was your first like North Star? That was the first one you wanted to work at.
Two of them. One of them, one of the first art books I ever had was Star Wars ILM map paintings, and I thought that was fantastic, obviously. And then it was Warcraft 2 was a huge game for me when I was a kid. I loved real-time strategy games. And I still remember the cinematics for that, which if you go back and watch now, they've upped their game a bit in the last 20 odd years. But they had this moment in the orc campaign where this dragon flew over this castle and breathed fire, and there was an orc coming out of the gates and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know what this is or what they do, but I want to do that. So that was my really big thing there. And then there's other influences like the original Jurassic Park or Aeon Flux on liquid television from MTV and stuff. So there was a lot of influences kind of going around that I was like, this is cool. I really like animation and computers and stuff like that. But mind you, this was mid-90s. So there wasn't anywhere near the information that was available now. I mean, there was barely an internet. So, I went to libraries to look this stuff up. I wrote handwritten letters to actually Blizzard and ILM, and Blizzard actually wrote me back kind of deal on letterhead, which I still have. So I thought that was nice of them. So I was like, okay, this is cool. But I found out what they did, what kind of jobs they had and stuff like that. And then I started going to school for that with that in mind, starting out in studio art at my local university and then transferring to Full Sail for computer animation once I realized that studio art was a much more broad scope. And I pretty much knew what I wanted to do animation wise, and my university wasn't going to cover that exactly. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have to test how much of a library nerd you were. What's the Dewey Decimal System for numbers for art? What's the range?
I could not tell you, but it would probably be pretty small or big. I don't know anymore.
I know, right? I was just in the library with my kids the other day. It's 700. That's how I was just there the other day. So that's how I remember.
Haven't used the a while kind of deal.
Yeah.
It was one of those things, like I remember actually, subscribing to books or magazines or whatever else to get 3D software trial versions or whatever else. Because again, this is long before open access for so many things like Blender and so on. I actually started out on the True Space 3D. I used Bryce, if you remember that.
I totally.
Yeah, so it's like everyone made their chrome balls and their checkered platforms and stuff. And it was just, I remember the very first animation I ever did, and this is, programs aren't really supposed to animate most of the time. Like these were modeling packages primarily, but it was a ball going from one cube to the floor to another cube to the floor and back kind of deal. And I think I rendered it out at like 100 pixels by 60, and it took hours on my whatever, Hewlett Packard kind of computer. But just seeing something that I made move kind of deal, it was really exciting. I'm like, I don't know, I still felt really excited about it. What was weird though was I grew up in a very rural area, so I was supposed to be an electrician, and my brother was supposed to be a carpenter. So we were supposed to build houses. So that's what my parents said that we were supposed to do. And I was like, I don't really want to do that, but that sounds logistical. Like, all right, I guess you can make a living doing that. So when I told my parents that I was leaving a full scholarship at my local university to go and leave to actually focus on animation, they were like, but you can make money in video games? Like they were very confused about this. But again, like to their credit, this was, every guidance counselor that I'd ever had was in the same mindset. It's like, well, this is an actual trade. This is something you can do. And it wasn't until like now when students say they want to be YouTubers or professional animators or whatever else, it's like, no, there's an actual industry for them. Like you can go on LinkedIn and find job postings and actual career paths for it. So back then it was a little bit more of a stretch to see if that was even viable. So I'm excited that they stood behind my seemingly radical decision at the time. So
yeah, that is, especially back then, because I remember, I mean, it was nothing. I actually thought that fine art was a more viable career than video games. So I went that direction. Oof, took a U-turn there.
I was supposed to be either a muralist or a museum curator. Those were the two main paths for studio art from the college that I went to. I studied under both, and they were both interesting and stuff, but it was not animation. And at the time, computers were very nerdy and had a negative connotation, like they were cheating or whatever else. And Photoshop was a slur kind of deal. It wasn't really generally accepted. And now everyone has games on their phone, or it's all acceptable, and everyone's glued to screen. So it's weird to see that shift from being mocked to being. I was in IT club in high school. I was in computer learning in middle school and stuff. And this is before students were even taught how to type. Like that was later. So it's weird to see. Like I don't even think they teach typing anymore. I don't think any kid would really need to learn. So
I think you're right. Yeah, I remember actually doing a secretarial course to learn touch typing.
So it's fun to see just how far it's come. But now when I see my own children actually playing with iPads and playing games and finding out apps, and I'm like, you have a device that has the world of knowledge and games and interactivity. It's like, that's like, obviously I'm biased because I want them to have all the cool stuff and whatever else. Because I'm 100% on board for Flash games and interactive animations and learning science through animated characters and stuff is a fantastic way to use the medium, not just for pure entertainment, but you can do educational and stuff like that. So I love it. It's great to see.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, let's I want to get into education, but since we talked about the career in the past, why don't we jump forward and talk a little bit about the career or how it all kind of works now? Because it's interesting that, you're right. Guidance counselors now say, okay, yeah, you can get a job here, but it's also a little more competitive than it used to be, or not?
Yeah. Well, one thing I've told many students that have contacted me personally is I don't envy being in your position, because what's expected of students now is a very finessed working knowledge of what you're expected to do. The days of hiring someone to train them, to get them up to speed on the software or the process is pretty much evaporating now. Like there's still going to be like, here's a week training, or here's a day or two kind of deal to get you up to speed on our particular, specifics. But with Maya being an industry standard for animation, and most people, hopefully knowing how to animate by the time they come out of school, they expect you to be a production level artist as soon as you start. Like that's different than when I was going in there, where it was like, oh, well, we want you to work, but we'll give you a little bit more leeway kind of deal. And the level of competition coming out of schools, because again, when I was starting my career, there wasn't many, if any, true animation schools, and the ones that were like Vancouver Film School or Ringling or Cal Arts and stuff like that, which weren't practical. I could not apply to them anyways, even if I got in, it wouldn't work out. So now that they do have more focused things like your own curriculum and others that allow, if you want to do animation and you want a job in it, you can go down this path and have a much better chance because you're focusing. If you want to go to a more broader thing, like our studio art degree, where they'll teach you everything, but not really to a professional or job applicable level, that's a riskier path to take, but it really depends on the type of student and the direction they have going on. I knew from the start that I wanted to work in animation. I didn't know what. I knew I wanted to work at Blizzard and ILM, but that's two very different paths. But I knew I wanted to do this. So I could put all my stat points just inside animation. So if you're used to playing a game like Diablo, it's like, oh, I could put a point into every attribute I have, or I can dump all of them at one and just wreck it through this level. And I found that to be very useful, because if you have a lighthouse to where you're going, like I said, I want to go to one of these two companies, what kind of work do they do? What kind of projects are they working on next? Is my work or portfolio geared towards that? Or do I personally feel vested towards something else? Like we get a lot of applications at this company, or ILM, sorry, and other places I've worked, where it's like an incredibly, talented animator, but in a vastly different style, like never having done motion capture or realism or creature work. And it's a very like either a commercial design or web design or stylized animation. It's like, it's beautiful work, but we don't know if you can do what we want you to do. So if you can start narrowing it down even further, it's even more beneficial. So having schools that focus, or students that know going into school, not coming out of school, what they want to do, is incredibly valuable for not only the curriculum, because we can give you the guidance you need, but also for the students to get to where you want to go sooner. Hopefully, that is.
Hopefully, yeah. That's interesting, actually. I'm reading this book by Peter Thiel, the Y Combinator guy, and 0 to 1. And he has this whole philosophy, because I've been through the startup scene. I'm still in the startup scene, and I'm like 50-50 on the startup scene, because it's very aggressive and very focused on scaling, and they have a very just a limited perspective on how they see value. So I'm like, it's hard for me to get my head there, but he has a whole philosophy. And one of the things that he said was that he created this framework where there's what he calls definite optimism and indefinite optimism. And hopefully this will make sense in a second. In the 60s, he was saying the world always thought engineering could solve any problem. So they were like, if you put your mind here, you go through X, Y, and Z, you will get, a result. And then that shifted. And today he was saying that a lot of it is indefinite optimism, which is a way of saying, we're going to all have progress. Things are going to be better. We just don't know what's going to actually work for you. And so that fit into education in the sense that, education trains you for a wide swath of things, because they don't know what's going to actually make a difference for you. So they want to generalize you. But that generalization is working against some of the things that are needed in the industry now, where you actually have to be definite. You have to define and say, I want this. I'm going to put my eggs in this basket, not 20 baskets, because, if you're going to get into this job of animation, you got to put your eggs in the basket. You got to focus, and you got to commit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Like, for example, like if you want to make your own game by yourself, you need to learn programming, modeling, rigging, animation, engine tools, everything else like that. And then if you want to be your own business on top of that, you need to know about business management and so on. And it's everything. You're wearing many, many hats. If you want to work at a high-end visual effects studio, you're going to do one thing because they expect you to do it very, very well. That's the whole point. We have an entire department for rigging. So even though I know how to rig myself, I don't know how to rig to the degree that the person sitting next to me does in the rigging department. So if you're looking to do, that's why an understanding of what you're getting into is helpful to help others guide you to get there, because I'm not a generalist in film. I'm a character animator. I'm expected to animate characters. So that's where I put all my focus and attention. The smaller studios that you work on, or the smaller projects that you work on, there is more breadth. So if you do want to do rigging, animation, and simulation, because it's all kind of movement, then that's a better fit for you. And you may not know you want that until you work at a smaller studio or a different project. Or like, I love video games, but after years of working in them, I realized I didn't particularly like making video games, because the game is pretty much broken until it ships, and then it's a fun game to play. So there's an understanding of the process where it's like, I didn't know that going into it, but I'm glad I got that opportunity to work at a small studio, at a big studio, on an MMO, on a mobile game, and so on. And the same thing happened with film. It's like, you work at a smaller studio. I did a bunch of stuff. It was fun, but I wanted to see if I could work on larger projects. And as the higher up you go, the narrower the peak gets, and you're expected to do very specific work. And that's kind of, you come from learning it, but at the same point, it does take a certain level of focus. And if you want to, spread your wings and try other stuff, you might get a chance to kind of, utilize your other skill sets. But if you can draw and animate, you're probably just going to be paid to animate. Drawing is more of a bonus at that stage. So, yeah.
But that can be scary, right? Like, how do I know I'm successful? How do I know I have the talent, for it?
Well, that's kind of, I don't know if I should have brought up the image. I'll see if I can pull it up later.
Yeah.
I thought my first job out of school was going to be my dream job. Like, I thought, I graduated, I had my diploma, let me hit send on this application, and then I'll start working in 2 weeks and we'll be good to go. It's been 15 years, still working on that kind of deal. So I realized, like, okay, so I'll take this other job when I graduated, because I was able to get an offer for another place. I had never heard of the company before, but it was in games. So I went there and like, okay, well, after this job, then I'll have my dream job, because now I have experience. And that didn't work, and that didn't work. And then I realized after a while, it's like, you really just have to enjoy the process of what you're doing and finding your place in the industry and what you're going for. Like, you can keep applying, and I did. For every year I applied for Blizzard for years. And you eventually, like, it might stick, you might get an interview, you might get you might land a job. But when you learn that your talents aren't connected to the studios you want to work for, your talents are something that you will build for a lifetime. So you can keep learning and keep growing. And you may find that, like, now I realize, having worked in games for several years, like, yeah, it would be fun to work at the studio, because I still enjoy the projects, and I have fond memories of playing the games when I was younger. But I enjoy making films. I really enjoy seeing it on the big screen, or working with the teams and seeing the departments and companies and stuff. And I only knew that once I got there. But there's a lot you can learn from just kind of poking around and seeing that. And you'll learn over time, like, yes, I do want to focus on this, or no, I enjoy being in more of a generalized role, or a different facet or industry in general, like, games or commercials or film or whatever else. But trying to have an idea beforehand still helps, I think.
I love that, actually, because that takes the fear of talent or no talent, which is really just like, it's an absolute. It's like, I have it or I don't. And it just puts it on the spectrum of, it's just a process. Like, whatever you were thinking, defines your talent, is just something you build through a lifetime. I love that.
Well, one thing too, I will say this, and I wish it would be more said in general from people, especially, ones that I've had a job for many years, so it's less applicable now. So giving advice to new students feels somewhat different in that sense, is that talent is you leaning your back against the door. Luck is the door opening. Like, if you're not leaning against it, if you don't have the talent, it doesn't matter if the door opened or not. So you just need to.
I love that.
keep leaning against it kind of deal. And eventually you'll get in. Any part of getting a job involves luck. It does. When I was going for my first job interview, I almost had to cancel it because a hurricane hit Florida. And my flight was almost canceled. And then I would have gone to a different job because that, job would have left kind of deal. And if I hadn't gone to that job, I wouldn't have met a close friend of mine who became my boss, or who was my boss, who became my friend, and so on and so on. So you need to keep practicing. You need to keep applying for work and doing personal projects and whatever else, because you still need to be leaning against the door. One of the biggest things that I've always given feedback for students is that once they graduate with whatever reel they have, no matter how good or bad it is, they send out their applications and they wait to hear back. I'm like, well, that's what you need to work on. There's no waiting. If it didn't work this time, you start your next reel, you start your next project and whatever else, because if your reel was good enough, you'd have gotten a job. If it's not good enough, you need better projects or better work. And I often tell students as well, it's like, work on smaller projects, small projects. 3, 4, 5 seconds, single characters, good performance, not a lot of accessories, not a lot of crazy. Save the animated short for later, because it's too much right now. You may have this beautiful idea, script it out, do the storyboards, save it up for it. But at the start of your career, your demo reel for animation, mind you, is a slot machine. You need as many wheels to line up as possible. And if it's not lining up, the faster you can swap them out, the better off you'll be to find that winning combination. If you're trying to go for games and all you have is an animated short that you've chopped up, but it doesn't have insects or zombies or whatever, Gears of War style this or orcs and that kind of deal, the faster you can swap those clips out, the more you'll look like you have a new reel sooner, as opposed to doing a whole new short film and running out of options. So when you're approaching getting your first job, it's just about continuing to produce work and realizing that once you leave an academic environment, it's on you to come up with those projects, assignments, whatever else. And some people respond really well to that free form mentality. And other times, this is the first time in their academic life, if they're in the US at least, that they've ever been left alone to keep working. I was given homework since I can remember in school, and you needed to have it done by Friday or on Monday after the weekend kind of deal. But when you don't have that pressure from the teacher or the school curriculum, most people kind of fade back from that. And they're like, oh yeah, I should do that project tomorrow. And that's when it starts to kind of slip away a little bit. It's like, well, no, you still need to do the work, regardless of whether or not you have an assignment due on Monday or anyways. So
yeah. I want to ask what makes a great project, but there was something else that occurred to me. And you had mentioned that the failure to get one of these dream jobs you had actually led to the life you have like now, led to an entirely different path.
Sure. Well, I mean, I always knew I wanted to work at either like ILM or Blizzard. My initial intention was Blizzard because I loved playing video games. I was a kid, I was 14. So I was like, this is clearly going to be the best thing ever kind of deal. And I knew I couldn't paint, because when my view of ILM at the time was like map painting and concept art, stuff like that. And Blizzard was more, game oriented, and I felt like I could connect with that. And this is still like, when you'd see behind the scene footage from these things, you didn't really see a lot of the nuts and bolts for animation at that time because it was still too much of its infancy. But when I realized that games weren't really for me, and mind you, I've interviewed with Blizzard a couple of times, that's how it turned out kind of deal. But it was hard to acknowledge that the goal that I was looking for, or the goal that I've been seeking for since I was 14, wasn't that pinnacle anymore. And it wasn't so much that I was lost and we were scrambling to find another one kind of deal. It was the realization that sometimes no matter how bad you want something, it's not for you kind of deal. And since then, I doubled down on working on pre-rendered and doing short films and well, not short films, I would say more snippets, I would say. Film is a big stretch. But really leaning into trying to get into visual effects. So I worked in commercials, I worked in previs, and then I worked at a small VFX house. And then I got a completely lucky chance break at Digital Domain because, again, this is what I say about leaning against the door, is that their animator had just finished up on Tron Legacy, and he extended his break after that show for 2 weeks. And they needed someone to fill his seat for 2 weeks to do some previs on X-Men First Class, because the director was trying to figure out how Shaw's superpower would work, where he turns into multiples and when he gets hit, whatever else. They were trying to figure out that visual. And I applied, and they happened to have my name on file, kind of deal. And they're like, hey, are you free for 2 weeks? It's like, sure, of course, why not? When I started there, the VFX supervisor for the client side was like, I like this version of Shaw, and it was the version that I had previs. So that's when Digital Domain offered me an opportunity to work on the film. And it was the reason I got into that film was because that animator took 2 weeks off. Like they didn't need more people to work on it. He would have done the previs anyways. And the way that just that sort of thing kind of works out is like, was I just as good at the time? Sure. Did they need me? No. So that break had nothing to do with my talent level, just had opportunity, timing, and of course, luck. So, you know, there's a frustration that students especially hit where, you know, they apply, they don't hear back, and they do, you know, DreamWorks and Blue Sky and Blizzard and Ubisoft and whatever else, they don't hear back. It's like, well, I guess I'm not good enough. It's like, or they don't need someone of your talent or skill level at this point. Keep trying, kind of deal. So yeah, once I realized that ILM was going to be more for that kind of deal, and again, like ILM was, I kept applying for them for just as much as I applied for Blizzard, but they didn't need to hire me. I remember a big one that really stung is I thought I lined up my cards perfectly for Transformers. I think it was 3, because I was in LA. I had just finished my personal animation for Transformers that I'd done for this Decepticon climbing over a truck. I knew people on the animation team for up in San Francisco and stuff. I'm like, this is all working out really well. We were in talks. And then I heard back from them, and they're like, no, we're looking for someone that's already been on a Transformer show before or has more whatever else. And I was like,
yeah.
All right.
Wow.
Just keep going, kind of deal. And I mean, it sounds kind of not bad, but you're gonna hear no a lot. Like if you're not hearing no, then you're either not applying enough. But you know, people have, you know, feedback for you. People have, you know, they may not hire you, or if they do, it's a pleasantry to be like, no, thank you, not at this time, kind of deal. And even when you get a job, you're gonna present ideas that don't work. So you need to have some level of thick skin or understanding that it's you achieving someone else's vision. So, you know, that you're gonna, you know, try to line up with that as much as you can.
I was reading in because I forget if it was August or it was a bit ago on your Twitter, you were kind of walking through your rejections, and you had one approach to it that you didn't recommend. Yeah, that sounded intense. So I'd love for you to chat about that, but also like what you do now or what you recommend people do to develop that thick skin, because it's so easy for our identity to be on that.
Gotcha. So yeah, that Twitter thread became oddly more popular than I expected. That was just me some early morning thing before my kids woke up to be like, all right, oh, that's a fun little thing to go down, kind of deal. So I got rejected from ILM many times, from Weta, that one burned, and then from Blizzard twice. One for their in-game, which ended up being Diablo 3 when I was still working in games. And the other one was for cinematics, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, is what I wanted to do since I was 14. So 20-something years of direction towards this. And I'd had multiple interviews. I had a test with them. I had an in-person interview, and they asked for, you're good at action stuff. We can see that in your reel. We're going to give you a performance test. Here, go and do that. I submitted that back. And like, oh, can we get another camera from this so we can see what you did for the face? And I was like, I sent that out. And then I heard back from them saying, we appreciate your application. You do not have the skills that we need at this time. Your polish phases felt rushed, and there's some other notes about my submission there. And I took that hard. It burned. There's no way like that one definitely took the wind out of the sails for a while. And what I did, which I wouldn't recommend, so put a big old disclaimer down there, is that I took that rejection letter, made it the background of my computer, and just bolded out the letters that said all the negative stuff that I had done. polished felt rushed and whatever else, the submission, whatever. And that was my background for 2-something years kind of deal, or 2+ years. And looking back, like that's a terrible thing to do, because previously it was always like StarCraft wallpapers, or spaceships cruising in, or orcs or whatever else like that. Just fun, inspiring images. And then I turned something really positive and exciting. So every time I loaded up my machine, every time I checked my email or got on personal projects, I was flooded with this negativity and reminder of what I did wrong. And what I really took away from it, years later, was that I still don't know why I tied myself and my own self-worth to a job I didn't even get. Like that's, I didn't do anything wrong. They just ended up not needing me for that particular project or that particular job. And that's okay. That's how this works. Like sometimes you're not a fit either personally or professionally or talent or whatever else. Sometimes that happens. It's up to them, it's up to you to keep going. And I think that the biggest thing for developing any sort of thick skin for it is kind of twofold. One is that no matter what you're doing, as long as you're doing something, it's not wasted time. Like that's important. Like most people want to have level ups like they have in WoW, where this holy ray of light comes down and you're now level 10. It's like, it doesn't work like that. You just get a little bit better. You make fewer mistakes. You take better notes. You submit fewer takes, and your clients respond better in fewer iterations, kind of deal. And the other facet of that is that you, for the most part, if you're working for a major company, and unless you're starting your own, you are achieving someone else's vision, whether or not it's the directors of companies or your leads or your supervisors, and there's a certain level of separation you need from what you're doing. It's not your self-worth. Like you're going to get notes because you're not that person. And that person may themselves not even know what they want. And they're relying on you to discover it. And coming up with those different iterations with enough passion to get it over the line, but with enough separation to not be, take it to heart. It's a delicate balance. It takes time. Like sometimes you really you stay up late on Friday night, or you work through the weekends to submit on Monday to only have it be brushed aside in the next dailies. You're like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't do that. But then you learn another approach. Like, let's look at the shot in context. Let's talk to my lead and see if they have any additional information or reference that I could pull from, kind of deal, to have a better understanding of the context of the shot. Helps you understand that negative feedback about your work is not negative feedback about you. And that's hard. Most people can't really relate to that. And again, I'll be the first one to admit it. 15 years of doing animation, it still burns to get notes. It does. Everyone wants like high fives and praises, and that's great. But it's still sometimes you're like, oh yeah, you're right there. That does kind of sting a little bit, but it's okay. It's all part of it. If it stings a little bit, you still have a little bit of passion in there. That was your level of enthusiasm. If you don't care at all, if you're completely indifferent, that could also be concerning. So there is a fine line to walk, and you just got to keep kind of bumper bowling down to try and figure it out. At least I had to. I don't know if other people did.
I like that. And so have you, would you say that there's, at least the way we phrase it at Vertex is, there's the artiste approach where, you put the beret on and it's like everything is you and all of that. And then there's the craftsman approach where it's like you just have to be strategic and, get your information and remember that this is a job and you're delivering a product. And there you go.
I definitely believe that no matter who you are, you're going to have a beret somewhere. It's creative. It's still a fun field. You got into something that's inspired you, whether it's superheroes or spaceships or whatever else. Something creative got you to also be creative. And I think that's great. But you are a production artist. Like that's important. You're a part of as bad as it sounds, an assembly line of what's being made to create a film. You are an animator. Before that was rigging, before that was modeling, and everyone else before and after you is doing their best work to make this project as a community, as a collective kind of deal. You're not some auteur artist that's just doing everything himself. Now, if you're doing your own short film or your own game, yeah, more power to you, but you're still going to be a craftsman to get that game done. throwing paint on a canvas still requires a canvas and brushes kind of deal. There's a technical craft to every creative endeavor. So having some sort of realization that you're being paid to do this one particular thing, but we expect you to do it with a certain level of passion and creative enthusiasm that, we hired you for, that we saw in your portfolio kind of deal. So.
I love that. That's great. That's a great way to look at it, because it doesn't get away from the creative aspect, which, like, you're right. I mean, there is an assembly line aspect to this, but it is creative work.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, like, for example, I'm a fairly technical animator. I would never call myself a technical animator, because that actual job title, like TDs and TAs and stuff like that, have a very specific role. But because when I was starting out, I wanted to do my own animations and short films and stuff. I wanted to learn how to rig so I could animate better. And then I learned how to script so I could rig better. And that's how I learned the secondary skill sets that I have, kind of like a trident. So if I get better at animation, I get better at rigging and scripting, and hopefully those all feed back into each other. But what ends up happening, though, is when you see, like, when you realize that the work that you're doing to make this, come through. Actually, I completely lost my train of thought. I'm gonna just muddle through.
I've got more questions.
Oh, sure.
So one of the things I wanted to come back to was a sense of, like, what makes a good project. So of course at Vertex, we're very focused on the accelerated career approach. And so in the game arts, we have certain rules and whatnot for what defines, like, a good project. We have people do props. Generally, I ask them not to do swords, because those are really hard to actually see the quality of it, and there's not a lot of material distinction. And if you look at a thumbnail, it's like, you can't really tell a good sword. It's really hard to see the differences. But when somebody is an animator and they're working on these 3 to 5 second projects that you're talking about, what kind of rules might exist for an animator for good projects? Like, do you have to put the face in? Do you separate the face into its own 3 to 5? Do you focus on kinematics? Because I see a lot of that, and Dan here has separated, different terms like that.
First thing off, the best project is the project that got done. So before you can aim as high as you want, but if you don't finish it, it doesn't count. So the goal is making it done. At least then it's in front of people that they can critique, get feedback on, and you can apply with it. You can talk a big game, but unless you have a reel to back it up or a project to show, it doesn't matter how cool it sounded, you didn't do it. So that would be number one. Number two, if I had my way, every character I animated would have a mask on. A face is a great addition, and a great animator that I worked underneath had a saying that a face is 20% of the screen and 80% of the importance. And I always thought that was a great ratio to understand. Like, if you do the face wrong, there you go. No one's going to look at the rest of your shot because your face is wrong. So if you're studying body mechanics, whatever else like that, masks, helmets, generic characters is fine, because we want to look at the rest of it. The other one is, I'm glad you mentioned it, parkour, gymnastics, skateboarding, stuff like that. People love doing that animation because they usually got into them themselves. But I can tell within a matter of frames if I need to watch the rest of this 20-second parkour clip. Doing a lot of work, doing a volume of work is not the same as doing a little bit well. So taking a single backflip or jumping off a wall and running off is enough to show your body mechanics, besides showing twirling over a bar, sliding down this. Like, a lot of mediocre is not the same as a little good. So I think that's aiming small in the timeline is a lot more beneficial. And I think, honestly, to kind of what you're going on about looking at a sword in a thumbnail is not appealing. There's two modes that I like to think about when I start a personal project. One is, what is the thumbnail of this animation? What am I going to show on Twitter, on my website, on Vimeo's static page? What is the one single image that I want to appeal people for? Is it a monster growling at the screen? Is it an explosion with a character flying through it, kind of deal? Like, what is the one story, the one frame that I want to show? And I get so much inspiration from like ArtStation concept artists that have like characters standing in like this, you know, medieval background or sci-fi trading port or whatever else. And it's like, that's that tells a story in itself. The dragon breathing fire down on the night. That's great. That's the whole story right there. And work backwards from that, or work out from that, what came before, what came after, kind of deal. So thinking of it from what's the selling point of that one shot is very beneficial. And the other one that I found is that contrast is everything. If you want to show a fun animation in 3 to 5 seconds kind of deal, you don't need a start, middle, and end, even though that's beneficial. But if you just show a change of character, of an ogre standing there and gets hit by a rock, spins around and growls at the camera. He went from idle to surprised to angry in 3 seconds, and you showed his personality. Like, did he fall over himself to do it? Did he catch the rock and crush it? Did he, you know, whatever. You can find the nuances in the character without extending the time of the project or the animation over and over again. But you can find where to add that nuance. And if it doesn't line up well, or if it's above your skill set for the time being, you didn't spend months on 30 seconds of animation. You realize quickly that this shot is not worth it, or you know, if you frame it over here, do that, it's more beneficial. So I always try when I'm doing, you know, a personal project, like what is the 2 states that I want to go through? Is it A to B? Is it, you know, angry to sad? Is it whatever kind of deal? And what's tricky though, and I found this a lot with you know, it's hard to go from cool to cooler or cool to badass. Like that's not really a range for a character kind of deal. So like if you did a parkour clip and the character tripped or fell down or had to, you know, catch himself and get back up and run kind of deal, it shows so much more character than just the physical kinematics of the body kind of deal. It shows like, did he slip and get upset? Did he, you know, punch the ground and get up with anger kind of deal? It shows character, no face, no accessories, no nothing. It just shows how you did a body performance, miming out the results. So yeah, just to kind of recap, you don't need accessories, you don't need cool stuff kind of deal to make the animation work. Think about what you want to sell from a single frame, and then just, you know, keep it short, and then try to think of, you know, the contrast in the shot will make it interesting. So kind of like contrast in an image, black and white, you know, whatever else. Contrast in character emotions will also make it more memorable. So
I love that. So I always tell my students that, you know, I can look at their sculpts and you know, it takes me just seconds to know where they are in the spectrum. And it's taken me years to be able to actually define those in a way that I can actually communicate to them and say, all right, so anatomy, if you don't have X, Y, and Z, then I know you're at this point and whatnot. And so like, especially when we look at anatomy, you know, I'll know where they are and maybe even how long they've spent in it. I just look at their elbows, you know, and it's like, oh, did you put the, you know, the bony elements, or did you just go muscle to muscle, right? And now you're just like, and it's Marshmallow Man, right? And that tells me right away. And so now that's like my teaching framework is that, you know, yes, you have the bony landmarks. Yes, all these pretty draftsmen talk about that. But as a sculptor, elbows, knees, know where that is. So as an animator, if you can, what are some of the things like the triggers that tell you within those first couple of frames whether or not that parkour is going to actually be worth the next 20 seconds?
Well, funny, I thought about this. Yay, I feel good to know the answer. One of the biggest things is, what are they doing with their hands? Like, a lot of people think that just because the rig came in like this, that's the default pose. It's like, no, look at your actual hands. It's always like half crooked into J shapes, thumbs bent in and down kind of deal. So is it a relaxed pose? And that gives you a range to go from fist to splay or whatever else. So keeping an idea about these 10 digits kind of deal is beneficial. The other one being, are your pull vectors, your elbows and knees, connected to your feet and arms? A big thing that especially happens with students when I was starting out as well was magnetic feet. Like they never moved their feet unless they absolutely had to. So it felt like the feet were just stuck to the ground and the hips were moving above it. when actually one of my first boss, when I was submitting an animation to him, was like, hey, look at you, you took a step. Good animators take steps. And I was like, what does that mean? And you realize like, you may not take a full like step up, step down, but a shuffle, a readjust, step back, getting ready for something. Like there's a lot more nuance to a performance than just the core, like the feet are here, then they're here kind of deal. And the other one being is that, or there's a few, is that I should not be able to tell how you animated your limbs. IK, FK, people always love asking that question, like, how do I animate this? It's like, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't be able to tell. You know, typically you want FK for the arms unless they're planting or holding onto something, or you want IK for the feet because they're standing on the ground. But at the end of the day, if your arms feel like tails, you did it wrong. If your feet feel like magnets, you did it wrong, kind of deal. So making sure that the limbs still feel like they have musculature to them, or, you know, anatomy or range of motion, like walk cycles. Oh God, okay. Your arms just don't sway like a rope. I mean, unless you're doing a stylized, and that's neither here nor there. A realistic walk cycle is very refined, or not refined, very, very subdued. You know, minimal elbow bend, not a floppy wrist. Fingers don't also do like an FK chain kind of deal. Like they pretty much keep their pose and just kind of splay and close kind of deal. And that's a big thing, because if a rig has FK joints, especially rigs that have FK on every axis, you start getting into this really like swimmy thing on the arms, and it loses all of its anatomy or connectivity to it. And that's a big sign. It's like, okay, well, you did that. The other one being, if an animation feels too pose to pose, which again is a beautiful way of animating, especially in step poses, you can get some really solid, you know, readable poses there. But if you use video reference, you realize that your body moves as a unit. If you look at motion capture data, it's a wonderful way to see that in 3D. But your hips drive the motion, and then your chest reacts, and your jaw goes down, or your head goes back, your shoulders only move a certain amount kind of deal. You start realizing that even if you just snap your arm out, your entire body just moved because your hips just slightly readjusted, and that moved your knee poles and stuff like that. Whereas in your mind's eye, you're like, oh, I just need to move the shoulder, the arm, and the hand. It's like, no, and the chest, and the other arm, and the head, and stuff like that. So getting that nuance from reference has always been beneficial. And then lastly, it would just be, if you want to level up an animation, like, again, this isn't so much like you know, good or bad or whatever else, but to really see that like extra little detail is how they manipulate the environment is, I think, always exciting. Like, were they bold enough to grab onto a rail, or, you know, it sounds silly because we're talking about parkour, but how a character holds a gun or a sword. Is it just IK snap to it and they're just fisting the whole thing the whole time kind of deal, breaking wrists and whatever else? Or are they reshifting their grip or adjusting the sights or whatever else like that? How they interact shows a much more junior to mid-level understanding that there's complexity involved and stuff like that. So just because the rig may have a prop attached to it and it now can hold onto a sword just perfectly, that's not how a person would hold onto a sword. They let go of the sword, come back, you know, choke up on it, choke down kind of deal. So how they actually show like a better understanding that their environment or props or accessories is, you know, whatever else. So.
But that takes so much time. Don't I just have to create as many animations as possible?
It does. And that's one of the things that I've told every student that hit me up trying to figure out why they didn't get a job from their first reel was like, your first project outside of that, if you want to work in like, you know, what game do you want to work for, movie or film or whatever, is like, get your phone, videotape yourself doing the action. Don't roto it, but use that as reference about seeing how your body actually moves. Because it's different. It shows you how much you actually squat down or how fast you can run or change direction, or whatever else. And there's a lot to it. A realistic performance takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, but then to make it sell, that's where you can add it on top of it. Like a classic animation example or project in school, assignment, there we go, is a box lift. Take a box, lift it on, put it on another box or a ball or whatever. That's great. That's a very fundamental thing for it. But you can level up that animation by adding context to it and engaging with the environment. Instead of picking up a box, It's a World War II soldier picking up an ammo crate and putting it on the back of a Jeep. That's cooler. You have now context if you want to work on Call of Duty or a first-person shooter or something like that, or a film digi-double for backgrounds and stuff. That's junior level work. But then you can take it a step further and think, oh yeah, how can I add contrast to this scene? He's picking it up while in a firefight. There's bullets firing near him and something hits near him and he gets surprised or drops the crate or whatever. Then you start to add a small story. It's still technically a box lift animation, but you've gone and made a selling point for this. Like, oh, that's the one that I did kind of deal. And I've told people before, it's like, think of an elevator pitch for your shot. I've seen 20 box lifts. How does yours stand out? It's like, oh, well, mine was the one where the guy put the box on the box. It's like, okay, that's helpful, but it's not gonna, jog my memory at all. It's like, oh, mine was the one that instead of doing that, I take your pick kind of deal. A blacksmith put a chunk of ore on an anvil and something like that kind of deal. Some sort of magical thing there. At least then you're adding context to it. Now everyone thinks like, well, I don't have a blacksmith model or a soldier model. It's like, you can get away with it. People will still understand, like, put a little helmet on it or a rifle on his back or whatever else like that. You can make any character feel like a soldier kind of deal. So it's not about making a new model or a new mesh or whatever else. You can still get that context without changing the character or the model, stuff like that. So. Yeah.
All right. So we are coming up on time. So there's we do have a couple of questions, and guys, I want to make sure I check. And Kevin's going to feed them to me. Kevin, if you don't mind, also have JM notify the character folks that I'm just going to need a tiny break. Okay, that's Bruce.
Sorry about that.
Good. No, I 100% agree. This is great. Okay, so one, I wanted to talk about your thoughts on mentoring, but before we get there, I don't know if I'm like off base with this thinking, but when I look at all the training that's out there, I don't see a lot of mocap. I see there's so much that's just keyframe animation. But how does mocap and all of that work into an animator's life, both in their training and in the daily job?
I would say because of my experience in film and select games kind of deal, like you're going to hit mocap eventually, and just realizing that it's data that you're going to do. It's like picking up someone else's scene where they've baked everything down. It's just done. You need to start working with it kind of deal. It's no more scary or frustrating unless you're applying for a very specific like motion editing role where you're expected to learn Motion Builder or blend multiple clips together. Typically, you'll be given motion data already on the rig and the controls, and it's just keyframe data that you need to work with. It's scary because it's, like that, but you throw a few animation layers on there and you start working with the principles again, and then you start to get ownership of it. In terms of training, I think because it is a fairly technical role, or it does blend the fields between like motion editing, animation, pipe, and stuff like that, it's less straightforward to just give a raw tutorial or based on it. Like I have a tutorial for applying motion capture from the free Mixamo library online to just any rig and stuff like that, because it is good to see in a demo reel, like, oh, you've at least once experienced cleaning up motion capture data to an actual pause thing. So that's useful for recruiters to see, because it shows you like, oh, I want to work in most video game studios, especially larger ones. You're going to hit mocap eventually kind of deal. Or if you want to work in film, you're probably going to hit it as well. There's always tons of keyframe stuff, but it is good to see.
Okay, so I love that. It actually is just like seeing it baked down.
Yeah.
So you still need the same principles, and mocap just becomes like another input for you.
Yeah. I mean, mocap is no more right or wrong. Like I worked on the 2019 Genie, and that was Will Smith's performance. Like there's a reason why we put him in a suit. It wasn't to get rid of his animation at the end. It was to make sure that his performance fit on the Genie. That was what we were trying to do. It wasn't bake it down on fives and rekey it, because you're not Will Smith, he's Will Smith. It's about taking that performance and adjusting it to fit your scene. Like, I'm this person, but I'm not an orc. So an orc might have wider stance or, pull out his elbows kind of deal and fit the performance together. Or a fun one to do is like, a mocap run and then a hand keyed hit and a fall over kind of deal, or a digi double takeover is something that's very popular in film, where you can't have an actor like Gal Gadot get hit in Wonder Woman. She smashes into a car and then stands up kind of deal. Standing up is going to be the mocap part, but you're doing the fly back and the hit into the car. So there is a creative aspect in blend for mocap, and it's still your shot. Just because I use mocap doesn't mean it's less viable.
That's great. I love that. All right. So in terms of, because you've joined us as one of the mentors. So what is one of the things that you think, and somebody who's wants to do this job, like what is going to make a successful student, so to speak, at least in your experience?
Having some idea where they want to be, like eventually. Obviously, like that's always been a big selling point anyways. Understanding that it won't be the first thing they do, and that it's a lifelong process. And hopefully over the last hours kind of help show that, where it's like it took, like I've worked at 40 companies or more kind of deal. I've worked on 200 commercials, 11 games, and 25 films. Like it wasn't just like I worked at one job for my entire career. Some people are lucky or fortunate to do that. Other people freelance even more than I did. So there's always going to be something you can learn from that. But a successful student realizes that they're always going to be a student. There's always going to be a level of understanding. It's like, I'm still trying to learn Python and rigging and scripting and facial performance and animation and simulation. Like, it's still something I'm still, like, I just did a tutorial on Gnome and DVDs and stuff like that to just keep like, oh, this is a new approach. That's something interesting, or different approaches. So it's, once you're in school and out of school, you're still learning, and just learning in a very focused and concise way at like Vertex School, or on your own by your own interests or demerits outside of it. So you're going to be a lifelong student anyways. So enjoy the process, not the product.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect. Let's take a look at some questions. So we got a couple from, I don't know. Okay, these are from the social. So someone's worried about using famous characters for reels, like Spider-Man and stuff like that. Any problems?
No, it's fine. The one thing, just don't copy what the famous characters already did. Don't take a Spider-Man movie and reanimate it. That's not the point. But Spider-Man can swing an infinite number of ways. Do that. Right. Do your own take on it, kind of deal. But using a predefined IP, that's fine. It's fine. You don't need to create your own.
Perfect. How difficult was it transitioning from small studios games to high-end VFX?
It took 12 years, so.
It's difficult.
Small end games were really fun because I made some of the best friends in my life in that thing, because we spent every single day, nights and weekends together kind of deal. And it was fun to feel like you were part of a 20 or 30 person team. But that wasn't, eventually I kind of, it doesn't say grow old, but whatever else. But it was a very long process that involved a lot of different steps. And every step I thought was going to be my last step. And that was never the case, where after working in games, I worked in larger game studios, and then I worked in small commercial studios, and then I did some previs and worked at small visual effects studios. So the transition was relatively smooth to go across, but it took a long time. It wasn't just I worked in games one day and I worked in film the next. That's a fairly rare jump. You need a little bit of in between.
That makes sense. And are you having to create a whole new reel in the free time? Like how do you address that?
Is this for a student or for me personally?
Well, it's part of the same question, which is, how you kind of proved it as you went along.
I had many hybrid reels, which were game cycles for this section, and then a few of the pre-rendered commercials that I had worked on, or personal projects that I'd done on the side. And then that once I finally was able to get enough footing or a long enough reel, by the way, reel insert thing, a reel doesn't need to be very long. It's enough. Under 2 minutes is fine. That's kind of a long thing, kind of deal. Minute and a half, it's good. You can do that. I know what you're going for. The longer, it's fine. But I had a lot of in-between reels before that, where I never had film work. I just had commercial work, or I had, TV spots or whatever else. But once I worked in TV, I no longer showed my game work because I didn't want that type of work anymore. I wanted to show focus on that. But then I had commercial work, Super Bowl spots and X-Men First Class, the first film that I worked on, or little bits here and there. And now I would have pretty much an entirely ILM reel because I've worked there for 5 years, kind of deal. So there's going to be a lot of transition periods for it. And to be honest, I haven't cut a reel in a long time, but I'm pretty sure if I did, I would still put some of the personal projects that I've done on there, just because I'm still proud about them and I want to talk about that shot to a potential employer because of why I did it or what I learned from it. So you can always get a little bit in there. The quick thing about reels, if you're going for animation, you can hold off on showing the life drawings and the still work and design work and stuff like that. You're an animator. We expect you to animate. It's great that you have those other skills, but stick to the animation for your reel at least.
Yeah, I've noticed, especially with animators, that there's a lot more of a 2D background than, say, my game, character and environment folks. But along those lines, one of the things that I think comes up is, do I have to draw? Number one, do I have to be able to draw?
No, you don't. It's great to have that ability. Like, don't get me wrong, you can get some beautiful silhouettes, but you can understand what makes an appealing pose without being able to physically draw it. Right. I mean, if I need to show my boss something, there's a feature in Maya called Grease Pencil. I think most 3D softwares have it. I can do some lines of action or redraw the limb, or I want the dagger to come down like this kind of deal. They're not critiquing me on my understanding of anatomy because they know that's just to convey the idea. Eventually, you'll do it in 3D on the rig. So the 2D level of understanding for artistic ability, it's a bonus. It's great to have, but nowhere near it. No one's going to quiz you on your 2D knowledge once you're 3D animating. So
that's awesome. Yeah, no, that sums everything up. All right, so let me see if there's anything else I wanted to grab. No, I think that's pretty good. Folks, if you're looking for Crit Friday, we're going to do it YouTube. I don't think we're going to have any Zoom, so we'll just do it YouTube right here on the live page. And so there was a lot. I mean, I wrote a lot of notes. It was really great. And I think Brian, it was Bruce. So Bruce Bryan was saying he loved that comment about no matter who you are, you're gonna have a beret somewhere, which is great. And the best project is the one that gets done. Yes. Awesome. All right, my friend. Well, I am super excited to be working with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great having you. Well, great being here the other way.
Great. All right, well, take care, and I will see you. I might see you tomorrow if Dan's not feeling well.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, hope everyone else learned something as well. So cool.
All right, guys. Okay, so we've got more scheduled for today, and remember, you've got to upload the reels today. If you do not upload it today, you are not going to get Kyle's eyes. You're not going to get anybody else's eyes on the work. And this opportunity, just doesn't land in your lap like that. So upload it on the Dropbox thing ASAP. And there we go. All right.